All right, welcome everybody. My name is Lisa Koenigsberg, and I'm the founder and president of Initiatives in Art and Culture. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you all to the first of a monthly series of webinars. The series is titled All That Glitters, and it will look at issues pertaining to gold and diamonds and celebrates the first decade of our conference on gold and now diamonds, which traditionally happens in April. And this series, which is a child of COVID, so wonderful things can come in times of turmoil. This series has been envisioned and is being launched to supplement the annual conference and other activities. It is not in any way a replacement. And in so announcing, I'd like to give a hearty thank you to De Beers, which has been absolutely instrumental in the birth of this new endeavor. We thank them for their partnership, counsel, guidance, and for spurring this on. And with that, I'm going to turn to a little bit of an overview of today, and then I will turn you over to our moderator. The topic of today's webinar is responsible sourcing of gold and diamonds in a post-COVID-19 world. And we are bringing you together to explore ways that exploitation and criminality can be prevented across the gold and diamond supply chains, and accountability and transparency ensured. These are very timely topics indeed. And it's my great pleasure to very briefly introduce the panelists as well as the moderator, and to thank them with all my heart for their participation, their support, and their commitment. This is a decade of building communities that consider value, values, and the way forward, and each person involved in this enterprise is surely committed to that goal. We're very honored that Edward Asher is joining us today. He is here as president of the World Diamond Council and has just begun his term. We could not be more grateful. Pamela Fierst Walsh is Senior Advisor, Conflict and Critical Minerals, U.S. Representative to the Kimberley process from the U.S. Department of State. We're really honored to have you with us. Next, Lester Friedlander, President, CEO of Clover Corporation, representing an invaluable perspective on these conversations. Norman Mukwakwami, consultant on extractives governance to Pact Global, Levin Sources, and to the World Bank in Zimbabwe. Welcome. So delighted you're here. Tiffany Stevens, President and CEO of the Jewelers Vigilance Committee, often referred to as JVC, and a very valued partner of IAC. We are delighted you're here. And finally, I am particularly pleased to introduce Iris van der Wecken, who is the Executive Director of the Responsible Jewelry Council, often referred to as RJC, and a colleague for whom I have immense regard and am deeply grateful to her for offering to helm this panel. And with that, I give you over to Iris, and I look forward to the conversation that will ensue.
Well, thank you, Lisa, and I'm delighted to be the moderator here today on responsible sourcing of gold and diamonds in post-COVID-19. And I would also like to take the opportunity to thank everyone around the world who joined in to Zoom in for this session. So a warm welcome to all of you. And let me dive into the topic today, because indeed shaping a sustainable post-COVID-19 world, we are 2020, 10 years ahead for the 2030 agenda. And it's clear that now more than ever, we need to take bold actions to achieve the ambitious vision of a transformative plan for the world, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. You know, the one plan that we all agreed in 2015 on peace, on planet, on people, and prosperity. And we talk about this era also of uncertainty, because indeed, you know, what will the future bring? We've got a health crisis, we're in an economic crisis, it's a symptom of a climate crisis, we've got conflict, we've got inequality, we've got poverty and hunger and more unemployment than ever. And we have environmental degradation. And in all of that, we now have to bring business ahead and have responsibility and transparency and move that agenda. So I think it's a great momentum to have this discussion today. And again, thank you, Lisa, for bringing around the table so many inspiring leaders. And let's discuss and reflect today on how societies can be more resilient while confronting these challenges. And we know that the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals requires reduction in the scale of many activities, including money laundering, that is destabilizing domestic economies. So a good topic that we're tackling today is AML. And just allow me also in the RGC Code of Practices that anti-money laundering is of course a key element of the code under the section of legal compliance. And there's also a specific section that is dedicated to KYC, anti-money laundering, and financing of terrorism. But let's dive into the discussion. And my first question is to Pamela, Edward, and Tiff. Do you feel that the aftermath and the impact of COVID has resulted in new challenges with regarding ensuring transparency? And if yes, you know, can you maybe elaborate a bit on some of these challenges? And I think, Pamela, I will start with you from a policy perspective.
Yes, of course. And thank you for the question, Iris. It's lovely to be here today with so many great figures in the industry. And so really happy to talk about this important topic. I think the question is, are these time-honored and important supply chains that have been historically and are still vulnerable to threats like money laundering, has that dynamic improved under COVID or not? And I think, unfortunately, the answer is no. The supply chain challenges for gold and for precious gemstones generally, specifically diamonds, but not just diamonds, is the challenges are only growing. We know that in a COVID-19 world, the artisanal miner in particular is more vulnerable to predatory pricing by middlemen or middle figures in the supply chain. We know that cash is king, and we know that gold just reached $1,900 an ounce. So when you put all of those factors together, you realize that the threat to these supply chains is not getting any easier. So this is the time where when you have a solid AML program in place, when you know your customer, when you're familiar with the floor of the Kimberley process and you go above that for your sourcing needs to make sure that you're actually getting at a whole host of other threats, when you're familiar with international sanctions regimes and aware where those sanctions threats exist in your supply chain, then you can really say, all right, we've got a handle on this. We have to stay vigilant because the threats are coming, but at least we have somewhere to start. If you don't have those in place, now is the time when you say, wow, there is no time like the present, because we have to have solid policies and responses inside the supply chain if you're going to prevent any of the threats from, you know, permeating and dare I say infecting what you're passing on to consumers.
Thank you, Pam, from giving that broader policy and government perspective. And Tiff, would you agree with Pam and how you're experiencing this, with the companies that you're working with, and what are some of the challenges that you see?
Definitely agree with Pamela. and really grateful to all of you for having me on the panel, and to IAC, and to be here and to have Pamela on the panel today, which is really exciting too. Yes, definitely agree. I mean, people around the world in all parts of our industry and in all parts of the world in general are worried about their survival on every level. And so, people get a little bit less, or the inclination might be to be a little bit less detail oriented, let's say. But ironically, it's now more than ever that you really need to make sure that you have the proper compliance programs in place, because this chaos is really making you even more vulnerable than usual to these types of threats. And one thing that we always at the JVC, we kind of bring these theories into practice and help people actually institute compliance programs, and we can provide you with that program you can actually use for your business. And we hope that people will use this time to make sure that they're protected. And we know that if you're listening to this webinar today, if you're a JVC member, you're not trying to launder money. You're right. You have good intentions. You don't want to be a money launderer, but what we're trying to protect you from is getting swept up in a bigger system that you might not be able to see. We can give you the tools to really, really look deeply into your supply chain and make sure that you can affirm that you are one of the good people who's trying not to do the wrong thing.
Well, thank you, Tiff. And I think the aspect that you're also, letting us know about is indeed the really importance of a systematic approach and an integrated approach. And that brings me to Edward. Lisa was already congratulating you, but I would like to take the opportunity also to congratulate you. And we're delighted to have your leadership on board. Edward, what is your view and what's your perspective now? Is there going to be indeed more transparency? And you gave a very firm and kind and constructive message in your newsletter, but it'd be interesting to see your view on this. Edward, I think you're still unmuted.
Yes. Thank you, Iris. I'm happy to participate today. Let me say the whole COVID has touched the diamond industry all over the world. And that's from the retailer to the manufacturers, to the diamond polishers in India or elsewhere, to the goldsmiths, and up all the way to the mining. And the World Diamond Council is the observer in the Kimberley process. And the Kimberley process is especially about the rough diamond production, which today, of course, is very limited and reduced. And that is especially true what Pamela said for the artisanal mining sector. And I think that sector is most vulnerable because actually there is so little demand for the rough. There is something that we call a diamond multiplier, meaning that if the retail sales are slow, then the manufacturers and the wholesalers are twice as slow and goes all the way up. So for artisanal miners, the situation is really very difficult. And that means that it is not improving. This situation is not at all improving the transparency at the moment, because in survival time, everybody is trying to make a buck, as they say. I think it is a responsibility for the industry and the trade to be very careful in what is happening. On the other hand, I think companies and individuals that are now experiencing that their sales are slow also have more time to look at the rules and to be better prepared for when business is picking up. So that's what I see, and that what we do in our company is have a close look at your procedures, at the RJC standards and the minimum standards that are required by the Kimberley process itself. So it has a big minus, especially for the smaller people, and it can have a hidden plus for people who have now find time to concentrate on how to improve their procedures and the way they work.
Thank you, Edward. And of course, we as Responsible Jury Council are here with our code of practices to support companies in that bigger journey of sustainability. And I just want to touch upon a few points that were raised, because we all touch one key element that of the Sustainable Development Goals is about leaving no one behind, and especially the most vulnerable. Pamela, you touched on artisanal scale miners, Edward, Tiff. I think there's a huge responsibility there collectively as an industry. And I also want to reiterate the message and the support from the call for action from the NGOs recently on this. And I think it's important to share that. And that brings me to you, Norman, because I would like to hear your perspective indeed. Then what is the relationship between anti-money laundering and development?
Thank you, Iris. It's certainly an honor to take part on this platform. So firstly, I'll just briefly explain how money laundering takes place in the gold and diamond supply chains from the perspective of a producer developing country. So firstly, money laundering mainly takes place through trade-based money laundering. So this involves under-invoicing exports or smuggling the gold and diamonds. It also involves over-invoicing imports of goods and services that are used to produce these minerals. And many of the gold and diamond producing countries failed to meet the Millennium Development Goals by 2015. And we're already struggling to stay on course to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, which is supposed to meet by 2030. Now with COVID-19, the situation is making many countries poorer, more unequal, it's destroying jobs, and the emergency measures that a lot of governments are putting in place for public expenditure and procurement, mainly for the health sector, are creating new avenues for corruption. This only makes the Sustainable Development Goals even harder to achieve now. To achieve Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, developing countries need economic growth. And a key part of the economic growth comes from increasing exports, such as exports of gold and diamonds, and also increasing the tax revenue that these governments can use to deliver social services such as education and public health. Now, trade-based money laundering reduces both the export revenue and also the taxes that the governments collect. So it eats into both the drivers of the economic growth. It also creates conflict over these illicit rents as the key players in the country fight over these rents. Now, anti-money laundering measures, or AML, help to stop this form of money laundering. And this is the direct way in which anti-money laundering contributes to development. It increases the foreign currency earnings and the tax revenues of gold and diamond producing countries. And with good governance, and I have to stress that you need good governance in these countries, these financial resources can help reduce poverty, reduce food insecurity. They can help create jobs, modernize public health systems, and make good quality education available to every citizen. So basically, they can create the foundation for economic development. Thank you.
Norman, thank you very much for this very clear perspective. And I think that brings me to you, Pamela, because from a government perspective, what is now shaping the AML agenda? And can you give us an update and where you see the priorities and what companies should focus on?
Right, and this is the part of the conversation that's just really hard, because under regular circumstances, I would show up and I would tell you what US government policies are, what our concerns are, and the private sector, depending on where they felt they were situated and where their principles and values laid, would say, well, that sounds hard, or absolutely, we're right on board with you, right? You'd get kind of those two ends of the spectrum. Unfortunately, I'm here in a circumstance that is of no one's liking, and all of the environments everywhere are getting more difficult. Edward was very eloquent in how he kind of outlined the specific impacts on this supply chain. So from a US government perspective, I'm still here, and I have to say things like Dodd-Frank 1502 remains the law. So if you're sourcing gold from Eastern DRC, you need to be aware of that. And whether you file with the SEC is something you should be discussing with your lawyer, right? I have to say those things. I also have to say, are you sure about the origins of your gold if you're getting it from Latin America? Because are you aware of the multiple sanctions efforts undertaken against individuals in Venezuela that are directly implicating the gold supply chain? So for US policy, our policy still remains, please be compliant with the law, and responsible sourcing is the right way to do it. But the multiplication of aspects through which companies need to be familiar so that they're kind of sealed up and not exposed to risk are still proliferating. And as I mentioned in my opening comments, because the supply chain is getting that much more treacherous in a way, from the artisanal perspective, you have to be extra sure that where you're getting your stuff from is not in violation with KP, is not in violation with Dodd-Frank 1502. Are you aware of the EU legislation coming online in 2021, and are you compliant with that? Because that's global, right? So U.S. government concern is to look and say responsible sourcing matters. It is the law, and it's going to continue to be important. It's just that the environment is difficult. There's no way around that.
Thank you, Pamela. And aside from the fact, indeed, it's just the right thing to do. And we are an industry of beauty and emotions, so consumer confidence at the end of the day will be critical for all industries. If it's fashion, food, diamonds, gold, silver. Edward, I think it would be good to know, as you just started your term as WDC president, what your priorities are, or your strategic priorities in driving the responsible sourcing agenda in the diamond industry.
Thank you, Iris. Let's say the term of the president of the World Diamond Council is only 2 years. And it's a great task to try and make a contribution during those 2 years, especially under the present circumstances. But the definition of conflict diamonds has been done by governments under the umbrella of the United Nations in the Kimberley process a long time ago. And for the last couple of years, we have had many discussions to expand the definition, including more aspects of social laws, labor laws, environmental issues, everything that falls under the common denominator of human rights. And that's one of the things we will continue fighting for. But in the meantime, it's not where we are today. And we are very much supporting and concentrating on the local, regional projects that companies, individual companies, are doing in producing countries. To give two examples, for instance, there is Gem Fair, which is done by NGOs as well as private companies, and there are other projects being executed at the moment in Africa and strongly supported by the WDC. So as far as I'm concerned, we will continue and have political discussions as soon as we are able to meet, because as most of you know, the Kimberley process this year is on the slow burner because we cannot meet. And the Russian Federation at the moment should have been the official chair, and that's postponed till next year. So hopefully we can meet in Moscow and in St. Petersburg next year. And then we'll continue those discussions. But that doesn't mean that we are sitting idle in this year, because there are many projects that we can support. And the WDC is also introducing the system of warranties, which is different from a Kimberley process. The Kimberley process is governments, actually 81 governments, being represented in the KP, as we call it. And that's the basis for everything. It's the basis for the rough diamond trade. Diamonds can only be exported by a country if they come with an official Kimberley certificate issued by the official government. And it can only, rough diamonds can only be imported in countries if they are accompanied by that KP certificate. System of warranties system is organized by the World Diamond Council and goes much further. It includes polished diamonds, and it is a self-regulation system in which companies are asked to scrutinize their own procedures and go through a whole list of questions, not unlike what the IJC is doing, in order to make sure that they comply to many more rules than only the KP. So in what we do from our side is on the basis of the Kimberley process, we are building our own structure to strengthen the control in the diamond industry. And in the end, only with one purpose, that is to, as you correctly said, it is taking care and promoting consumer confidence. And that includes all those things as anti-money laundering and the fighting of rebel movements in certain countries.
Thank you, Edward. And all supply chains are connected, but I think there is also the element, indeed, of the shared responsibility and the importance of having, very good mechanisms that are interconnected. And that brings me to you, Lester. Could you share a bit about the systematic approach and also how you help your own clients build that transparency into their operations?
Thank you, Iris. As a global sourcing and manufacturing organization in gold jewelry, we represent the interests of many large corporations, and those interests today are very acute on making certain that there's no AML activities and that the codes of conduct and other elements of security are in the manufacturing process. As such, what we have done is naturally using the RJC platform as a basis to approach the marketplace. We've gone, one step farther in that we've elicited product traceability through the manufacturing sector. That means it's everyone documents who the elements of their supply chain is, but very few people move back into the flow down documentation. That means that when a specific company sources components, they need to understand all of their supply chain and how that supply chain approaches the marketplace to make certain that the same levels of security are in place and the same precautions are in place in the supply chain to make certain that the security is there to prevent AML. And that's something that we've started in 2020, and we've worked successfully with all of our supply chain to create traceability. Every organization handles metal in a unique manner. That means you don't find two large organizations that do things in the same fashion, and you now have moved to documenting the method by which they operate. And in that documentation, they transfer that documentation, and that documentation is transferred through to the end distribution channel where they have records of where the gold came from. We're making our manufacturing base record each source of gold for each lot of jewelry that they manufacture. We haven't gotten that, back to the specific ore at the mine, but basically no one can provide gold that doesn't have RJC, RMI, or LBMA documentation. And in such, they need to go back in their supply chain to make certain that the same documentation is supplied to them through every component. The jewelry industry is really one where there are a great many component manufacturers, and every manufacturer, no matter how large they are, depends upon component manufacturers. And monitoring those component manufacturers allows them to have a better understanding of how they operate and whether or not they're following strict guidelines.
Thank you, Lester. I think it's good to have that, the practical view from you working very closely throughout the supply chain. Tiff, and I think that brings me to you because you've done a lot of leadership work on AML. And can you share a bit more about your recent partnership with Jewelers Mutual Group and what does that entail and what you see as the advantages of this partnership?
Thank you. Sure, happy to. So like I said before, one part of the JVC's mission is to bring these responsibilities that might seem somewhat esoteric down into the practicality of your day-to-day business. If you don't know JVC, we'd love for you to join. We're a membership organization. We are a nonprofit and we are neutral. We're not in the business of selling things. I'm going to tell you about a product that we developed where the proceeds go back into making sure our organization exists, but our product is by no means the only one in the world. So pick the one you like. We built one for you. We hope you like it, but there are other options out there. So to do your AML program, you can do it yourself, or you can outsource it to an attorney or an accountant if you have those resources. But you can do it yourself. You can take care of it yourself. In the past, we have provided an analog paper-based system for you to do that yourself, or you could have one of our lawyers come in and set up your system for a fee for service. In this last year, we've partnered with Jewelers Mutual to create a software-based product. So we're bringing compliance to your couch, and the time is just right for that, as we are now on our couches all the time. So we've created a software-based system where you can do your own AML compliance. And so we're really hoping that this brings up compliance across the industry, because just about every single one of us are subject to these regulations. And you really have to have, as your step one, as your strong foundation, as your base, to be AML compliant with these federal guidelines. It's the law. You just have to do it. That's all there is to it. And the IRS can come knocking to make sure that you have completed this and that you have done what you're supposed to do. Your assets could be frozen if you haven't. There's all kinds of things that could happen if you don't comply, beyond just the good-natured, we all want to be, helping the world kind of thing that we've talked about so far. There are real world consequences for your business from the government if you don't do it. Additionally, what we see more often at the JVC is, here we are in the jewelry industry, we're regulated by AML, but other industries are too, most importantly, financial services and banking. And so your bank is really risk averse, and it doesn't want to get in trouble for AML. And so it's looking at all of its clients, that means you, to make sure that you can show that you're not exposing them to problems with AML. And so we've seen banks just somewhat unfairly perhaps, put any jewelry business as high risk. So you're having to prove to your bank that you're not exposing them to AML risk. So it's really important that you have your program in place and that you can show if someone from your bank calls, because we've seen this happen recently. Your bank will call and say, we're going to shut down your account in the next 48 hours unless you can produce the paperwork that you've been AML compliant. So of course, in that case, you would want to have that ready to go so you don't have to drop everything that you're doing for your business and try to take care of it in a rush situation. So at JVC, we're offering something called Jewel Pack with Jewelers Mutual. You can do this all on your computer. We do still offer the paper version if you'd like it. You can also engage your attorney or accountant. But please, if you haven't taken the step yet, please don't be scared. It's definitely something you can do. It's a modular thing. You just go through the 5 steps, you get yourself set up, and then about once a year, you do kind of a check and make sure that everything is operating in place as it should.
Thank you, Tiff. And I think it always goes back, well, first of all, indeed, it is a law, and we need to think even beyond compliance. And at the end of the day, if we want to create that consumer confidence, it's really that our product touches the lives of people on the ground and creates positive impact. And that brings me back to you, Norman. And we see the call for action from the NGOs and we embrace it. And I think it was really good that Edward also referred to some of the great initiatives that are out there. what are for yourself the biggest challenges now of assuring transparency in the ASM sector? And also, what can we do as industry to accelerate that agenda?
Thank you, Iris. I'll answer the first question, which is what are the biggest challenges for assuring transparency in the artisanal and small-scale mining sector? I would say there are 4 key challenges. The first is the incentives for the actors in the artisanal and small-scale mining sector to be opaque about their activities. So they have burdensome legal and policy environments, which are created by the host governments in which they operate. They also operate in a political economy where politically exposed persons, so people working in the public sector or voted into office, and community leaders, who are usually part of the traditional leadership in their communities, do not want their own involvement in the sector revealed. So in some countries like Venezuela and Zimbabwe, these politically exposed persons are actually on international sanctions lists and don't want to be known to be participating in the sectors and working within the artisanal small-scale mining sector. Then there's also the weak property rights that they enjoy, which are caused by the host government. So all these issues build into the first challenge, which is there are no incentives, or there are very limited incentives for actors in the artisanal small-scale mining sector to be transparent. And the second is there's lack of good quality data, for NGOs, for industry, for governments to work with and bring about the solutions that are needed to create the transparency. The third challenge is there's no sustainable funding for the data collection, management, and the use of this data. Transparency is really around data. To know who's doing what, who's producing what minerals, who are they selling to at what prices, what sort of working conditions are at these operations. So you do see a lot of NGOs have done a lot of piloting of work that could be done. There are governments that are interested in building the systems for traceability, but the challenge is always how do you sustainably fund these efforts to ensure that even when the NGO projects end, the governments, the communities in the artisanal scale mining sectors are able to sustain the systems that create transparency. And the last challenge is there's increasing marketing of gold and diamonds in emerging markets. We're talking about the UAE, we're talking about India and China. And some of these markets may not be as committed to transparency as some of the traditional markets that we're used to working with. So this is a new challenge and one that also needs to be taken into within the context. Then I'll answer the second question, which is what can industry do and other actors, what can they do to create greater transparency? So firstly, the miners themselves, the artisanal miners themselves need to be capacitated to do basic record keeping, to comply with the regulatory reporting requirements, and to also take part in voluntary reporting in the spirit of due diligence guidances such as the OECD due diligence guidance. I participated as a consultant in a training for a group of women miners who were taught how to use the craft code at a gold processing facility level. So this is what we also need to do to take those global standards right to the artisanal miner on the ground. Supply chain actors in the industry, processors, manufacturers and buyers also need to be implementing the due diligence and traceability mechanisms and be creating economic incentives for transparency by the miners themselves. So, either increasing the price that is paid for gold that can be shown or diamonds that can be shown where they've come from, and many other ways of incentivizing that participation. And regulators need to be encouraged. Industry typically has good relations with regulators, governments, and they need to be motivated to continuously improve the policy environment to enable responsible artisanal mining, while disincentivizing unsustainable practices. They also need to be motivated to require reporting in an achievable format. And I need to stress that the format needs to be achievable for the artisanal small-scale mining sector. Many miners are illiterate. Many miners do not have the time to take part in onerous record-keeping processes. So it needs to be simple but effective. And lastly, development partners, so your own host governments, operating in developing countries, through the many aid initiatives. We're talking about the USA, DFID, where the tax money from the industry is going and eventually coming as aid, should also be directed at funding multi-stakeholder programs that deliver sustainable artisanal mining practices and require data collection in existing projects. So there are a lot of projects supporting the sector, but not all of them are aimed at transparency. So to motivate those development partners to integrate or mainstream data collection and transparency in these projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. And I see that Edward would like to step in. So Edward, I would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I would like to give some comments on what Norman just said, with all respect to his opinion. But if we look at transparency, I think it is a little bit easy to say that the three countries that he pointed to, the United Arab Emirates, India, and China, are less committed to transparency. I think that goes by far too fast for me, because I know some sectors, some countries, some centers have been criticized. But in general, we have to look at, if you do it country by country, especially India, there are more than 1 million people working in the diamond industry. That means that somewhere between 5 and 10 million people depend on it. The whole system of the KP, the system of warranties, the IAC, is meant to promote transparency in the diamond industry. So you cannot say that a whole country is not committed to transparency. We have listened to Pamela and to Tiffany explaining exactly the laws that are applicable, not only in the United States, but worldwide. And that is certainly true for many other laws that have not been mentioned here. But anti-money laundering is universal. The United Arab Emirates has been built up with great success to a tremendous, large trading center in rough and polished. Have there been criticism to the way that has been handled in the past? Absolutely. But you can't say that the whole UAE today is not transparent, or it does not stick to the rules as we have formulated them for all diamond centers. And the same, of course, goes for the PRC. The PRC, China might have their own political agenda when we have discussions in the Kimberley process, like every other country has political agenda, but it doesn't mean that they are not committed to the anti-terrorist financing, anti-money laundering rules that we have formulated. Talking about the laws, may I take the opportunity to bring another aspect forward to it, which is so important to the diamond industry, including the gold and platinum in which it is mounted. Because if we look at it from a consumer perspective, what do we want? What the diamond people actually want is that the consumer who walks into the jewelry shop can ask, where does the diamond come from? Is the diamond conflict free? Where does the gold and the platinum come from? Do you know where you source it? And the system of warranties and the warranty system of the KP means that the legally mined diamonds, and that's 99.999% of the world diamond production, that you can guarantee it from the rough to the polisher, to the wholesaler, to the goldsmith, to the jeweler. That's point one. Point two is what we call, we must take care as an industry that everybody who is involved in the diamond industry, the gold industry, is making a reasonable living under the right working circumstances. That now is very much under pressure. That's the way I started it, and that's what I wrote in my newsletter. But also there, we must be very careful in normal times, and especially in these times, that we give enough attention, that the people involved in the diamond industry make a decent living and work under the right circumstances. So it's a total package what we are talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. And Norman, you know, I think you have given, you know, some really good points, but also I can speak, you know, as a responsible jewelry council. When we were founded in 2005, it was a pioneer vision to bring the industry together to really build an integrated system, because you need human rights, labor rights, environmental impact. You need, like you said, Edward, the whole systematic approach of management practices. And that takes time because of global, long, complex supply chains, but it's not an excuse not to start it. And there's always, you know, the momentum to start that journey and commit. And it's also about leadership. So I think we need indeed to accelerate leaders, you know, with purpose to continue to drive that agenda forward. And we are having a lot of discussions, but I would like to have the view now of all the panelists, and we can maybe start with Pamela from a government perspective, because, you know, when we look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, we look at Goal 17, partnership. So my question to you is, you know, what is the new model of partnership? Is this crisis, is COVID teaching us something about a new kind of model that we need to bring to the table to accelerate efforts on transparency? And how are you as organizations working with other organizations to drive transparency ahead? So I'll start from the policy perspective, Pamela.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's a really great question. So I've said this before, which is it's a difficult thing to say. I see opportunity in the middle of a pandemic, because I don't want anyone to think that that's all that I'm looking at. But you have to at some point just try to be as constructive as possible. And so partnership has historically been an area of importance, right? You can look at the KP, which is a trailblazer in responsible sourcing, however it may have been surpassed by this point, but still a trailblazer, right? That was based on a tripartite structure of civil society, of governments, of industry coming together and working forward. When you fast forward and you get to something like Dodd-Frank 1502, the United States started a public-private alliance for responsible minerals trade with a really forward-looking NGO called Resolve. And we were able to bring massive names to include now Signet, but also, you know, Apple and Ford and other big names that the folks on this call would know, to say, okay, we care about establishing conflict-free supply chains, because at that point in time, those supply chains weren't sure how to do it because it hadn't been done yet. It was, as you outlined for RJC, a little bit visionary, right? They had to get there. So I look at the history of responsible sourcing and see that the progress that's been made at every critical inflection point was made possible by partnerships. And so when I look into, you know, my crystal ball of a current COVID and maybe hopefully soon a post-COVID world, I see the need for continued partnership. Now, the things that I would like to see more of in partnerships that I discuss or explore with people is more understanding of what the private sector wants. I think that the civil society part of the supply chain, as Norman has been, you know, incredibly concise about the types of things that are necessary, we don't always get that same granularity, because for companies who've been practicing responsible sourcing for the last 5, 10, 15 years, some of them might be on autopilot. Some of them might say, I've got my AML, I've checked the box, I'm good, you know, and they move on. That's not necessarily the dynamic conversation we need to be having. So I would love to hear more from private sector about the types of things that responsible private sector actors are looking for in the form of responsible partnership, so that I can work toward that, right? So that I can make sure I'm being the best partner on my end. That's what I'd love to see more of, Iris.
Well, thank you, Pam, and we'll definitely be in touch, because the RJC has launched an SDG action platform, and that's all about data impacts and moving that agenda. So, and that brings me to Tiff. Tiff, what's your view? as a CEO, as a great leader of purpose. I congratulate you on all your efforts. What's your view on this new model of partnership? Is business as usual an option?
It doesn't seem so on any level. And I really just want to emphasize and I agree with what Pamela said. I mean, that's really what's such a beautiful way to say it, and a really interesting last part of her commentary, which really has me thinking too. And I think, I don't know what everybody else thinks, but when I hear you say that, I think, well, I wonder if, certainly people in industry have their own particular points of view about what they're trying to achieve or would like to ideally achieve with this. But I bet a lot of it comes back to the kind of conversations they're having with their end consumer, whoever that end consumer of their part of the supply chain is. And it's so fascinating to watch how public opinion, it seems, has been tracking through the crisis and the types of connections that everyday consumers are making between sustainability and environmental, all these issues that get wrapped up into responsible sourcing, and the prioritization that it seems like the everyday person is really starting to grasp onto with these issues. And I think we've seen it really play out, at least I've noticed it play out the most in the mainstream media with fashion. It seems that conversation has accelerated 10 years in 4 months. And so certainly we can't be far behind, although I think jewelry is special. I'm biased, but I think jewelry is special because we're not fast fashion. We're the slowest fashion of all. So, we have that going for us, but we certainly have other issues. But yes, I'm very excited for all different kinds of partnerships. And at the JVC, we certainly sit at the intersection of a lot of different types of groups. And we love connecting the dots, bringing people together, and trying to make sure that all different kinds of needs are met. With AML, I'll just wrap up by saying, with AML specifically, we're just trying to make sure everybody is at that step one of having their basic program that you legally have to have. And I'll keep saying it until everyone has done it. But you got to get to that step one, because there are some other really cool steps you can go from there. We've spoken with US government about additional triggers and flags that you could add to your AML program to help unearth some other types of activity that we might all be concerned about, with human trafficking or wildlife trafficking, that you could build on top of your own AML program. But you've got to get to that step one first to be able to launch into these super interesting partnerships.
Thank you, Tiff. And I think we'll definitely, after this panel, we'll have, a debrief, and whatever materials we can share with the audience, I think that would be very valuable, because I'm getting a lot of questions, what are some practical steps depending where I'm in the supply chain, and how can I do things better? Lester, what is your view on partnerships? And I'm just very conscious of time, so just wrapping up the partnership engagement model. So if you can give your perspective.
Well, one of the biggest challenges that we see is today, especially with COVID-19, is interruptions in the supply chain. And, the fact that everything that we monitor as manufacturers flows down, we've given a lot of guidance to our partners in terms of risk-based analysis. It's an overlooked portion of manufacturing where people really study their supply chain, study their processes, and analyze risk. And therefore, it allows them to meet the challenges of interruptions and meet the challenges when they don't get the proper documentation from a specific supplier, or someone tells them that this is the only place that they can get their gold. They understand that, and they're able to communicate it. In general, what we find is that the addition of compliance personnel within their organization on a full-time basis is the crux of it. So when you have people working with your supply chain on a continual basis, not simply when you have an examination, whether it be a GMP or a CDC, whatever those organizations come in, but on a 12-month basis, working and understanding how your organization functions and how you work with all of your partners. That's the element that we're promoting, because that in and of itself makes them more secure as manufacturers and gives us as a supplier a better opportunity to have continuity of supply where there is no interruption, or we don't have to challenge them that they don't have the right security within their chain. And that's the crux of the matter as we see it.
Thank you, Lester. And Norman, you already touched upon the model of partnerships and what you saw the challenges, but can you just give a crisp summary of, what do you think is the successful component of building a new kind of partnership?
Thanks, Iris. I would say the responsible mining standards that we're seeing emerging, the OECD due diligence guidance for the gold mining. There's a framework that I've seen that for ethical and responsible, or an ethical and sustainable diamond industry from the Natural Diamonds Council. These are creating a platform on which the private sector or industry in general and NGOs really see eye to eye, and not only is it about speaking the same language, but it's also creating a system, particularly around traceability mechanisms and supply chain due diligence, where NGOs and other community actors can be part and parcel of the baseline studies that are conducted for due diligence, can also be part and parcel of the solution. So where you see child labor, can you engage NGOs to address the child labor issues in the supply chain? Where you see illicit financial flows, are there think tanks in the country that can help you understand these better and address them? And I certainly believe that these frameworks and these standards are certainly the platform on which the NGOs on one hand and industry on the other can create these partnerships to deliver solutions.
Thank you, Norman. And it's about true transformative partnerships. And that brings me to Edward, because Edward, we already also were receiving some questions, and I'm just opening the questions from the floor. And I've received one of the questions is, and it probably has to do also with, future partnerships or collaboration to promote transparency, but how will the effectiveness of the Kimberley process, certification process, and the system of warranties be enhanced by the use of blockchain platforms? So the enabler of technology. Edward, you're muted.
Okay, thank you. That's a very good question, but we need some extra time then, because blockchain is a very complicated technology that is under development by many manufacturers to see if we can and how we can include it in our supply chain. But that's technology. Let me just say one or two things about the objective that we have in working with others. For us, the system of warranties that has been developed by the World Diamond Council and that will be introduced later this year and probably to the public very early next year is essential because it takes the KP certificate and the warranties from the chain of supply a step further, that we can do it in polished and that we can do it at every step of the sale of a diamond. Dus including all those trading steps that are done before the diamond ends up in a ring. The second part is I mentioned that we will strongly support regional activities, and I named one, like another one from the Antwerp World Diamond Center that is active in Guinea with their project, and there are more private companies doing this. So I think that the cooperation between centers as well as the organizations that are very active in this supply chain comes as a natural logic and is something on which I will be working with our team very hard in the coming year in order to get a better integration of the standards that we are using and that we are promoting.
Thank you, Edward. And I'm just taking one more question from the audience, and I would suggest, Lisa, before we conclude, that we can definitely maybe take some questions, because there are a lot of questions and quite interesting to tackle them. offline. But Norman, there's a question for you on, depending on the level of government corruption, can the proper taxation and invoicing of goods benefit the ASM communities?
Thank you, Iris. So certainly, as I'd stressed earlier, good governance is key to ensuring that any financial resources that the public sector makes deliver on development and deliver towards sustainable development goals. Unfortunately, corruption is one of the many illicit financial flows that limit this ability to translate tax revenue to development. And I would say all stakeholders can play a part in fighting corruption. It's a platform on which industry, the artisanal miners themselves, as citizens and voters for the governments they operate under, can play a part in the fight against corruption. But certainly, I would say there is no question that corruption tends to be a challenge in many of the countries in which you find artisanal and small-scale mining, and it affects the ability of the tax revenue collection translating into development.
Thank you very much. I would like to take the opportunity to thank my panelists, Lester, Pamela, Edward, Norman, Tiff, for this really interesting discussion. And I think it's clear that the discussion on partnerships is one that we need to continue to have, because that will really drive transformative change. And we talked about it, and especially about leaving no one behind, with a focus on ASM. Just some quick thoughts to conclude. I think we agree that, first of all, everyone has a key part to play in the supply chain. This is the decade of action. The effective combating of money laundering requires not only the creation of appropriate government policies, but also strong actions from all organizations within the industry and the private sector to build AML systems, to improve resources on education and training, like you said, Tiff, to guide, direct, and to integrate systems in an organization, to have really that impactful responsibility approach. And there also, forgive me, but I do also look at the RJC as the essence and the fundament and the code of practices. Implementing strong policies and procedures and methods of combating money laundering increases the cost of money laundering for criminals. So it will, thus increasing costs, makes this illegal process hopefully less profitable. I think it's, our aim for 2030. So let's act and work more closely together to ensure this necessary collaboration and alignment as we implement global approaches to securing a fair, healthy, and prosperous future for ourselves, our children, and grandchildren. And I think we owe it to the future generations to build a better world post-COVID, and the SDGs are pivotal to this endeavor. So I'm looking forward to continue the discussion, happy to answer any questions offline. And Lisa, we would like to take the opportunity to thank you for leading this initiative, and we're here to support you on this transformative journey to continue to promote the beautiful industry we work in every day. Thank you. Lisa, you're muted.
Sorry. In closing, I'd like to take a moment, first off, to thank all of you from all over the world for joining us. We hope that this is just the first of the conversations in which we will engage with all of you. I'd also like to thank all the panelists and Iris for their extraordinary work in the world and for joining us today. Deeply appreciate it. And we look forward to picking up these issues, because one of the things that this session demonstrates is that these are complex issues and that we need to keep coming back to them and in effect refining and revisiting. I'd also like to mention that the date for our second webinar is actually set. It is August 19th, and the title of that session is The Worth of Gold and Diamonds. Beautiful things need to be pure, not just in carat, but in heart. A quote from Cherie Blair. And so we very much hope you will join us then. And I'd also like to take a moment to congratulate the RJC, which this year marks its 15th year. And that's an extraordinary accomplishment, and one I did not mention at the outset. And again, to express our thanks to each of you and also to De Beers for its partnership in this effort and for spurring us on in this 10th year of our building communities that consider values, and the way forward. So we'll be on. For those of you that need to leave, please, we hope to hear from you, and we hope you will join us again on the 19th of August. And for those of you that can stay, we welcome your comments and questions.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. So absolutely great to be with you, and so grateful for your participation.